Okay, so we're going to continue our discussion of the circulatory system with the heart. So keep in mind what our main goal here is, and that is that we're trying to move blood flow from one end to the other because we're trying to carry all these nutrients. More so, we are focusing on the heart to oxygen and carbon dioxide movement in and out of the body. So when we take a look at the heart belongs to the cardiovascular system, which means that the heart in conjunction with vessels, we deem that to be the cardiovascular system. Now, when we pair the cardiovascular system with blood, we deem that to be the circulatory system. All right, so we're still talking about the circulatory system, but specifically to the heart. Now, because we're focusing on the exchange of those blood gases, we talk about the movement of blood flow to the different chambers of the heart. Now, the vessels are divided into two circuits, the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. So let's go over the pulmonary circuit. The pulmonary circuit is going to be related to the exchange of blood gases in the surface, the exchange surfaces such as the lungs. So we breathe air, and within that air there are multiple, molecules, but the one that we're concerned about is oxygen. So we breathe oxygen, we bring that to the lungs, and we breathe out CO2. All right. Now there is a capillary exchange. We're gonna use that as a capillary, and we have our heart. Right? So we're gonna use just blue to represent some poor or deoxygenated blood. So from the right side of your heart, we're gonna pump deoxygenated blood, reaching carbon dioxide, and we're going to unload that CO2. And in exchange, we're going to bring back oxygen, and that is gonna go back to your left atrium. Right? So the vessels related to the exchange of blood gases they belong to the pulmonary circuit. Now, let's talk a little bit about the systemic circuit. So once we've picked up all of that oxygen, we're gonna take it to all of the tissues within your body. And once it delivers all that oxygen to all of the tissues in your body, blood is gonna start picking up carbon dioxide. So we're gonna bring back carbon dioxide to this chamber right here. Okay. The blood flow, these two exchanges are happening at the same time continuously, and blood is alternating between the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. We will briefly discuss vessels, but this will be our focus on the next chapter. So let's talk a little bit about arteries, veins, and capillaries. So arteries means that we are taking blood away from the heart. Veins, we're taking blood to the heart, and capillaries, we're specifically talking about the exchange of nutrients. It could be gases. So it could be that we have arteries that carry oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. And the same goes for veins. Veins could carry oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. It is important to note that both of them can carry either oxygenated or deoxygenated blood because sometimes it may cause confusion. You will know the difference between the two of them depending on the direction of blood flow. So if it is away from the heart, it is an artery. If it is a vein, it will be to the heart. Let's go ahead and erase this just for a second, and let me just paint a picture for you. So we have our heart, and we have a total of 4 chambers, and they are named right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. So we have blood vessels bringing in the oxygenated blood to the right atrium. All right, and because it is going to the heart, it is called a vein. That's correct. And we're making it blue. Now the blood flow goes into the right ventricle, and then it goes into the lungs. All right, and then from the lungs it drops off all that CO2, carbon dioxide, and then now we pick up oxygen, and now we're gonna come back through the left atrium. Now this vessel that is going into the heart, it is a, so if it is bringing blood to the heart, means that this is also a vein. All right, but now it is oxygenated, so you can see how here we have a vein that brought the oxygenated blood, so mostly CO2, and here we're bringing oxygen through also a vein. All right, so the fact that it looks blue or red, it doesn't mean that it is an artery or a vein. Now most commonly, because arteries carry oxygenated blood, they're gonna look red, but it's not always the case. So just keep in mind that distinction. All right, now let's keep on to the flow. So we bring in the oxygenated blood after it's being consumed by the tissues into the right atrium. That goes to the right ventricle, then it goes to the lungs. The lungs, we drop off that carbon dioxide, and now we pick up oxygen. Let's go ahead and make sure that we put in here O2, and then we bring it back through a vein to the left atrium, then it flows back to the left ventricle, and then from the left ventricle, now this is the pulmonary circuit. Then now we're gonna go into systemic. So now we're gonna go to the body. So from the left ventricle, we're gonna go with a lot of oxygen. We're gonna take it to that person right here. Now, if it is taking blood away from the heart, what would that be? An artery. All right, so this will be an artery right here. The capillary exchange, the capillaries refer to that network of small vessels where exchange of nutrients, gases is happening. So remember that the exchange doesn't happen from one cell to the other. It happens between the interstitial fluid, right? So we have interstitial fluid, we have the cells over here, and the gas will go into the interstitial fluid, and within the interstitial fluid, then it will go into the cells. Okay. Now let's go back. We'll go back to the basics, and we will go over and over about the path of blood flow throughout your body. So remember that your heart has 4 chambers. Let me move this. Okay, we have the right side and we have the left side, and the top chambers are called atria. So we're gonna call right atrium and we're gonna call the left atrium. Now we have the right and then we have the left. The bottom chambers are called ventricles. All right, we have the right ventricle and the left ventricle. And keep in mind that the right atrium is collecting blood from the systemic circuit, right? Because we're bringing in all that carbon dioxide, poorly oxygenated blood or full of carbon dioxide into the right atrium. Now it goes into then through an atrioventricular valve into the right ventricle, and that right ventricle pumps blood to the pulmonary circuit because it's now bringing it to the lungs. Now within the lungs themselves, we're going to drop off the CO2 and then we're going to pick up oxygen. This is still the pulmonary circuit. So the left atrium is it's now going to collect blood from the pulmonary circuit. So it's now going to go here. And the left ventricle now is going to drop in the direction, and it's going to pump blood to the systemic circuit. Now from here, it goes out to this person. Okay, and so on and so forth. And after the oxygen is being delivered to those tissues, the byproduct for that will be carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide will be then reloaded into this through a capillary exchange. Right. So here we have the right ventricle, okay, sending blood to the pulmonic circuit. There is exchange of gases, and then once we have that exchange to the pulmonic circuit, then it will go back to the left atrium, that is still part of the pulmonic circuit, and then it will go up into the systemic circuit. Once it goes into the rest of your body, there will be a capillary exchange right here where we are dropping off all the oxygen to the tissues, and then we will bring all these carbon dioxide rich or deoxygenated blood from the systemic circuit into the right atrium. The heart. The size of the heart is about of a closed fist for everyone, and it will change depending on your body mass. It will sit 2/3 of its mass to the left of the midline of the human body. So picture the thoracic cavity, all right? In between those two lungs, we will have the mediastinum, and this will be the thoracic cavity. And in the mediastinum, you will have the heart sitting like this, and you will see that the mass, 2/3 of the mass of the heart are left of that midline right here. The heart anatomically has a few landmarks, and we should orient the heart based on the apex and the base. Base means where the heart is attached to, where the vessels, the gray vessels, are coming from. So wherever you see the aorta coming from, the superior vena cava attached to, this will be the base. And the free end of the heart is what we call the apex. Here, this will be the apex. The heart is enclosed within different membranes as well. So let's take a look at what these different layers are. So we have the pericardium, and we have also something that is called the pericardial sac. Let's see the differences between two. So the pericardium, we're gonna call this, let's just rewrite it here, has two layers, the fibrous layer, and it also has the serous layer. The serous layer is further divided into two sections, and that is the visceral pericardium, aka as the epicardium, and it also has the parietal pericardium. Let's see where these lay out in a picture of the heart. So this will be your heart, all right, kind of like that. And we have the first membrane will be the serous layer. So we will have the visceral pericardium will be the same as the outer membrane of the heart, and then it doubles onto itself, and it is this outer portion that we call the parietal. So this will be the parietal pericardium, and this is the visceral pericardium. These two make up the serous layer, and it is within this space that we have serous fluid, and this serous fluid reduces the friction as the heart beats. This space is called the pericardial cavity. This space allows for the expansion and contraction of the heart with every heartbeat, and the fluid that is in between, that serous fluid, reduces the friction of every beat. Outside of this parietal layer, we have a fibrous connective tissue, a very tough tissue that we call the fibrous layer. The fibrous layer. The sac, now we're going to talk about sac. The sac is made out of, we're going to hear pericardial sac is composed of the fibrous layer and parietal pericardium. So we are omitting the visceral pericardium. So when you're talking about the pericardium, you're talking about the different layers of the outers of the heart, the different membranes to the heart that the heart is enclosed in. And when we're talking about the pericardial sac, we're talking specifically to the fibrous layer plus the parietal pericardium. It doesn't include, the pericardial sac doesn't include the pericardial cavity, where we have the fluid that reduces friction. Okay, let's summarize. So we have the heart sitting within the mediastinum, that it is located within the thoracic cavity, surrounded by the lungs. We have the right and left. Your heart has different membranes, and these membranes is what we determine to be the pericardium. The pericardium has the fibrous layer and the serous layer. This is different from the pericardial sac, where we have the parietal epicardium or pericardium plus the fibrous layer. Let's take a look at each one of them. So we have the serous layer. The inside is the visceral layer that is contiguous with the heart. And this one is also called the epicardium. This epicardium folds onto itself, and then it goes on to become the parietal layer. The parietal layer has an attachment to the outside layer of the fibrous layer. So we have the serous layer and we have the fibrous layer. The fibrous layer is the outermost tough connective tissue protecting the heart, and then the serous layer is the one that produces the fluid in this pericardial cavity. This again reduces friction and allows the heart to beat freely. This plays a huge role in two different diseases, such as cardiac tamponade and pericarditis. Within cardiac tamponade, the pericardial cavity is filled with blood. Filling this space with blood will prevent the heart from beating, from expanding and contracting, and it will lead patients into issues where blood will back up because we're unable to move blood, we're unable to pump it. Pericarditis is related to inflammation. Itis is related to inflammation of these membranes. If there is inflammation of these membranes, the patient will experience pain with every heartbeat. As we continue with the anatomy of the heart, we focus also on the chambers themselves. Remember that the top chambers are the atria, and they are thin-walled. They're small but expandable, so they are in charge of receiving the blood flow from either the systemic or pulmonary circuit. All right. So for the right atrium, we're receiving blood flow from what circuit? The systemic circuit. And then the right atrium, the left atrium, is receiving blood flow from the pulmonary circuit. Now, although they are small, because they are receiving blood flow, there is something that is called the auricle. It's a little section of that chamber that may expand. It's like a balloon that comes in and recedes and expands when there is blood flow. Now, they are thin because they don't have to pump blood too hard into the ventricles. All right. The ventricles are thicker and they are stronger because they need more muscle to pump the blood out. Okay, they need to pump the blood out. Now the muscle of the pressure of the muscle of the right is usually smaller than the one on the left, and that is because the blood that is going very close by, and that is to the lungs, right? You don't have to go very far. Now, when we're pushing from the left ventricle, this is usually thicker in size and is pushing to the systemic circuit. And the systemic is a higher pressure. I'm just putting here. We talked about they are both thick wall, the left one more so than the right one. Okay. The heart, anatomically speaking, is divided by something that is called the coronary sulcus. And it's a groove that goes around the heart 360. So the heart kind of looks like this. All right, and it is this groove around the heart that we can use anatomically to divide the atria from the ventricles, right? The atria from the ventricles. And we also have another anatomical structure that can divide the right and left ventricles. And that is what we call the interventricular sulcus. And this is the coronary. Okay. So actually, before we move forward to the next slide, blood moves passively from the atrium into the ventricle, and it fills because we're receiving blood and we're trying to fill those ventricles to pump it into the next circuit. So that blood flow, that filling from the right atrium to the right ventricle is about 70% passive. All right, there is a little bit of a squeezing. That is why it is thin, because we don't need that much muscle. All of it is through just direction of blood flow. That brings us to another picture. So the heart, remember that it lines. We have one lung over here and we have another lung over here. So about 2/3 of the mass of the heart are on the left side. We have the base of the heart right here, which is attaching to the great vessels, and we have the apex. We have the base. All right. We have also a couple other anatomical landmarks that we want to look at, and that is the interventricular sulcus, and there is two of them. We can look at it from the anterior side or the posterior. If you're looking at the posterior interventricular sulcus, then it will be this part right here. Let's go ahead and make it right here. And when we look at the coronary sulcus goes all around the heart. all right? And that divides the atria from the ventricles, okay? So as we move forward, what makes up the heart? I want you to think of something that is called cardiac muscle, which are basically made out of cardiomyocytes. Cardiomyocytes are different than muscle cells, okay? And this is because cardiac muscle cells are smaller in size as opposed to regular muscle cells. Muscle cells sometimes they are inches long, and they are multinucleated. Cardiomyocytes, for the most part, are small and they have one single nucleus, right? These have something that we call a branch connection. All cardiomyocytes could look like this. All right, so this end right here is what we call a branching, and that allows for the cardiomyocyte to connect to two cells at the same time. Sorry, let me just keep it blue. All right, and we're gonna talk about why it is that, but why it is that this is useful physiologically, but there is a branching category. They are small, and they have something that is called intercalated disc. So this connection right here to each cell is what we call an intercalated disc. An intercalated disc means that there is a step, this connection right here. Let's just zoom it in. It is that connection of the cell. It looks like that. They're matching, and that increases the surface area connecting each cardiomyocyte. All right. That intercalated disc is made out of by desmosomes and gap junctions. All right, so desmosomes are the actual anchors that keep them glued together. All right. And the gap junctions are the openings that allow the flow of ions from one end to the other. And this plays a huge role in action potentials. As you may recall, action potentials are related to the movement of ions from one cell to the other, and with that you change the charge of the entire membrane. So if there is a change of ions on this cell, they will diffuse and they will also flow into the next cell, changing the charge, and with that triggering an action potential that goes from cell to cell. This is useful because it allows the heart to, through one stimuli, stimulate all the other cells as a whole cell. All right, it will allow for that contraction of a cardiomyocytes to be uniform. This is a histological picture of the intercalated disc. So we have, it's actually, let's just see. We have the intercalated disc, we have the cell, and here we have desmosomes to attach one to the other, because when they are contracting, these cardiomyocytes are contracting, you don't want them to rip apart. So the desmosome is the actual protein anchor on one side and the other. So that is the anchor. And the gap junction is the actual gap that allows the flow of ions freely from one end to the other. And because they are branched, now this cell, let's assume that the stimuli comes from this side. This cell will not only stimulate this one, but will also stimulate this one right here, assuming that there is a branch in here. So it will stimulate this one too. All right. Continue with the anatomy of the heart. The heart has multiple layers. We talked about the outermost layer already, which is the epicardium, also known as the. Now wait for your answer. Think about it. It will be the visceral epicardium, the visceral pericardium. So we have your heart, and we have the different layers. So we think of this layer right here, the outermost layer, as the epicardium, or the visceral pericardium. The most of the muscle itself in between, after that, it will be the myocardium, and this makes up for that bulky portion. Okay, myocardium, that is contracting during a heartbeat. And we have then the inner layer of cells that surround the inside of the heart, that is in contact with the blood itself, and that we call the endocardium, right? We have septums right here. We can think of it as divisions between the right side and the left side. So we have the interatrial septum, because it's divided in the atria, and we have the interventricular septum. You can estimate the position of that septum based on the anatomical landmark of the heart, that is the atrioventricular sulcus. All right. Okay, so we talked about the interatrial septum that separates the atria, interventricular septum that separates the ventricles. We want to keep things separate because we want to make sure that the blood flows from the right place to the right place. So we're picking up blood from the systemic circuit, taking it to the pulmonic circuit, and then bringing it back, and so on and so forth. The connections between the right atria and then the left and then the right ventricle is through something that we call atrioventricular valves. In the heart, we have 4 valves, so 2 pairs. We have the first one, we're gonna draw it in green, which is this one right here, which will be called the tricuspid valve. So this tricuspid valve will have 3 cusps, and we'll talk about what those look like in a second. And the other side will have, we'll put that in purple, called the mitral valve, or the bicuspid valve. All right, so it will be this side right here, and this one has only 2 cusps. We'll talk a little bit about how they differentiate. And those are the atrioventricular valves, the AV valves. So we talk about this one. What about the semilunar valves? These are the other 2 set of valves. So the semilunar valves are the ones that connect the ventricles to the vessels. These valves, we'll talk about from the right ventricle to the lungs. This vessel is called the pulmonary trunk, because the movement of blood flow goes from the right ventricle to the lungs. As soon as contraction ends, blood may start to back up. So these semilunar valves will close and then prevent the backflow of blood into the right ventricle. This is the pulmonary valve. And the other one is on the left ventricle. Let's go ahead and erase these. So we're pumping blood to the aorta, and as soon as we push blood really hard to go into that systemic circulation, The blood, as soon as the contraction ends of the heart, then the blood will try to rush back, and then there will be a semilunar valve that will close to prevent blood flow of that blood flow back into the left ventricle. The main function out of these four valves either be the pulmonary valve, the and we'll put the aortic valve, the pulmonary valve, the aortic valve, the tricuspid valve, or the mitral valve is to prevent backflow. All right. Going back to the atrioventricular valves, blood flow goes from the right atrium to the right ventricle. But when it starts to squeeze to send it through that to that pulmonary circulation, these leaflets will shut. All right, and it will send it to that vessel itself, to the pulmonary trunk. And the same goes for the mitral valve on this side. As soon as the left chamber is full with blood, okay, and it starts to squeeze, that force upwards is what is going to shut that mitral valve onto the left side. We're gonna rehearse a lot of some of the processes over and over again. So if you find that it is somewhat confusing or is overwhelming, just keep in mind that we'll rehearse it over and over again. Okay. So in summary, we have the heart and we have a couple anatomical landmarks. We have the base of the heart and we have the apex. Now the heart has multiple layers. We have the visceral pericardium, which is also called the epicardium. All right. Now the center, the muscular portion of this is called the myocardium. And then the inner side lining touching the blood, it will be the endocardium. Good job. Now the heart it has four chambers. It has the right atrium, right ventricle. We'll put this in blue. Actually, this is something that you guys can see. Left atrium, left ventricle. All right. Each one connected to different vessels, and we'll talk about blood flow in a second. But we have a four set of valves that prevent the backflow from one chamber to the other as you're trying to move blood. So as we're bringing the oxygenated blood from the right atrium, and passively your heart is filling the right ventricle. All right. As soon as the contraction of the right ventricle starts, these leaflets right here, which are three for the right side, the tricuspid, will shut. Okay, will shut it, and then it will push blood into the pulmonary trunk. That pulmonary trunk, as soon as the right ventricle is done squeezing, we have here the three cusps right here that are going to prevent backflow of the pulmonary trunk into the right ventricle. Once there is oxygenation happen, oxygenated blood goes back through a vein into the left atrium. There is passive filling of that left ventricle. That left ventricle after that will start squeezing. As soon as it squeezes, it will shut the mitral valve close, and right now we have blood flow going through the aorta, and it will pass through the aortic valve. As soon as we're done contracting, the blood will try to come back, but it won't be able to regurgitate or flow back into the left ventricle because we have a semilunar valve there, the aortic valve. Going back to the membranes, remember that we have the pericardial sac, or a pericardium, and it is divided into the fibrous layer and the serous layer. The fibrous is the outermost layer of connective tissue, really tough, preventing anything from breaking through to the heart. And then we have the serous layer that divides into two sections as it folds onto itself. And it is within this serous layer that we create a fluid that allows the heart to move within. Okay, it allows the heart to move within, to expand with minimal friction. All right, and the layer that is closest to the heart is called the visceral pericardium, and the other one is called the parietal pericardium. So that visceral pericardium is also called the epicardium. The space in between those two layers, the parietal and the visceral, is the pericardial cavity. Okay. Let's move on to the next section. Okay, so going back onto the flow of blood, remember that we are bringing deoxygenated blood from the systemic circuit into the right atrium. Now, the right atrium is letting all that flow passively going to that right ventricle, and as the blood is flowing down, we're going through an atrioventricular valve. There is an interatrial septum and a interventricular septum. All right, so as the blood is flowing down, okay, here we're passing this valve right here, this atrioventricular valve, and the one that is on the right side is called the tricuspid valve, and it's called tri because it has three cusps. Okay, yeah, three cusps. Now on the left side, we have the left atrium, we have the left ventricle, so the blood flow goes like this, but there is in between them, connecting those chambers, that valve. This valve is called the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve, and it only has two folds. All right, the opening between the right atrium and the right ventricle, remember, is that a atrioventricular valve, and these valves are made out of fibrous tissue. Right, they open up when you are trying to fill the right ventricle or the left ventricle, and they close when you are squeezing the right ventricle or the left ventricle. When the right ventricle is squeezing, is contracting, it is gonna shoot blood up into the pulmonary trunk, to the lungs. But because we don't want, as we're trying to push the blood to this vessel, to the pulmonary trunk, we don't want it to go back up into the right atrium. So that is where the atrioventricular valve comes into play. It would shut up, it would shut down, okay? And it will be like a parachute. It will close like this, allowing the blood flow to go into the lungs. And the same goes for the left ventricle. As soon as we have all this oxygenated blood into the left ventricle, we want to bring it to systemic circulation, and it starts to contract, and we want to send it to the aorta, into systemic circulation. Now, as we start to contract that left ventricle, that pushes the leaflets of that atrioventricular valve close together. Okay. The leaflets, we'll talk about that they're connected to something that is called chordae tendineae. We'll take a look at one fibrous tissue right here. It's going to be a papillary muscle, and there is going to be an attachment. This is called the chordae tendineae, which is basically cords that prevent that leaflet from flipping all the way up. So it allows it to close, okay, it just holds it together so that it just does this. Okay, as soon as this ventricle starts to contract and pushing blood this way, these leaflets close, all right, but they don't completely flow all the way open because we have something holding them together, and that is the chordae tendineae. So we are permitting the blood flow in one direction from atria to ventricles. Ventricles. There are a couple associated structures with the stabilization of those atrioventricular valves, and that is the papillary muscles, which is this right here, which is basically just a little bit of muscle that connects the chordae tendineae holding that leaflet together. This is a better depiction of this section, and that is the fibrous tissue, the leaflet. All right. In this one, we have two leaflets together. So you will think that this will be the bicuspid. And when we're talking about the bicuspid valve, we're talking about the right or the left side. That's correct. We're talking about the left side. What is another name for the bicuspid? The mitral valve. So this will be the left atrium, and the left atrium is receiving oxygenated blood or deoxygenated blood. It's going to receive oxygenated blood coming from the lungs. So that oxygenated blood is moving into the left ventricle. And as soon as the left ventricle starts to contract, because it's now wanting to send it to systemic circulation through the aorta, these leaflets shut together. Okay, they shut. But they don't do this number, okay? Because they have chordae tendineae attached to them. They have the chordae tendineae attached to them. And the chordae tendineae are attached to a papillary muscle. All right? So this will be during the relaxation period, where there is filling. Okay, they're open when you are feeling blood, into the left ventricle, and this will be during contraction. Now the blood is trying to go up the aorta, but you can see that now it is closed, sealing and preventing the backflow of blood into the wrong direction. We focus on the atrioventricular valves, and we talk a little bit about the semilunar valves. So the semilunar valves also prevent backflow, but they prevent backflow not from the ventricles into the atria, but from the vessel into the ventricle. So we have semilunar valves, and they look the same. They're basically made out of 3 leaflets, okay? And they prevent backflow from large vessels into the ventricles. So we have let's actually just draw it right here. We're gonna start with the right side. So we have the right ventricle. Once that atrioventricular valve is closed, the right ventricle starts to contract and it starts sending blood through this vessel that we call the pulmonary trunk. That is the name of that vessel. So these leaflets open up during that contraction. They open, allowing the blood to go in this direction. But as soon as the right ventricle starts to relax to allow the filling from the right atrium, then this blood might start to go back. So these leaflets shut. It is that semilunar valve that prevents the backflow from the blood in that vessel to flow back into the right ventricle. They all have 3 cusps, and they support each other like a tripod. There are no associated structures, and what they mean by that is that it doesn't have chordae tendineae. We don't need chordae tendineae because it's not a high pressure system. We're not squeezing against them. We're just preventing backflow from a passive contraction. Okay, so we move blood flow, but we're preventing backflow. But these vessels themselves are not contracting against it, so there is no reason to have chordae tendineae. That is different from the atrioventricular valves. Remember, the atrioventricular valves do have associated structures. They are papillary muscles and chordae tendineae, because we want to stabilize them, because that muscle that is pushing, is a high pressure system. And we have 2 types of pulmonary valves. We talked about the right one, which is the pulmonic valve. All right, the one on the left side is the aortic valve. Okay, the same principle will apply. The semilunar valves look like this. You can see this is when they are closed. So this will be during the contraction or relaxation of the ventricle. That's correct. So during the relaxation, because it is relaxing now, there is the feeling of that ventricle. If it were to be contracting the ventricle, this will be open. All right. But you can see how they fill up like this. Okay, they kind of like come together like this. Okay, well, let's recap and let's talk a little bit about the right atrium specifically. So the right atrium is receiving the oxygenated blood from the pulmonic or systemic circuit. That's correct, the systemic circuit. And this is the oxygenated blood to the right atrium. Now the right atrium, the atria, you should know that atria have a specific characteristic, and that is that they have pectinate muscles. And they are ridges within the atria. So the ridges within the atria are right here. And these ridges inside of that atrium is what we call pectinate muscles. Now the right atrium receives blood flow, the oxygenated blood flow, from three main vessels: the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus. CS, we're just gonna put CS. Now the superior vena cava is bringing all that deoxygenated blood from the upper extremities, so your head and arms. The inferior vena cava is bringing also deoxygenated blood, but it's from the lower extremities, from your abdominal organs, from your legs. And the coronary sinus is bringing deoxygenated blood from the heart itself. The heart, remember, that is a muscle, so it's consuming, oxygen, and there is a release of the byproduct of a carbon dioxide. So three main vessels are bringing the oxygenated blood to that chamber. This is a picture putting it all together. So let's see if we can find recognize some of these structures. So we have the right atrium, which is a chamber that is receiving or pumping blood. It is a receiving chamber. So it's receiving oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. It's bringing deoxygenated blood. And what are the three main vessels that is receiving deoxygenated blood from? Superior vena cava, inferior vena cava for the legs, abdominal, from the head and the arms right here, and the coronary sinus. Where is the coronary? The blood flow coming from the coronary sinus comes from the heart, all right, because the heart is consuming its own circulation. Now as the blood starts to fill this chamber, it goes into the right ventricle. So the right ventricle is a pumping chamber, and you can see that the musculature is not, it's not as thick as the left ventricle, and that is because it only has to push into the lungs. So the valve that is right here that you see, this is called an atrioventricular valve, also called as the tricuspid valve. And this tricuspid valve is made out of fibrous tissue, very dense tissue, that is connected to papillary muscles that use chordae tendinae to stabilize those structures. As blood fills and this chamber starts to contract, the blood, we want it to move this way, not into the right atrium. The atrioventricular valve is preventing the movement of the blood back into the right atrium. So this closed, and this allow the blood flow into the pulmonary trunk. As we move into the pulmonary trunk, we're going to pass something that is called a semilunar valve. Specifically to the right chamber, we're talking about the pulmonic valve. And this pulmonic valve is preventing backflow into the ventricles. Now we go to the lungs, and then in the lungs we release that carbon dioxide. Now we pick up oxygen, and when we pick up oxygen, then we go back through the pulmonary veins. Why a vein? Because it is going into the heart. Now, as we go into that left atrium, we're relaxing that left ventricle, and we're feeling it passively, and this bicuspid valve is open. As soon as we start contraction, we start sending blood into the systemic circuit through the aorta, and we pass a aortic valve right here, and this mitral valve starts to close. Okay, keep in mind that this is the base, this is the apex, and we'll start focusing on the other structures in a minute. But as soon as you take a look at this picture, you should be able to recognize most of the structures and some of the roles that they play into the functioning of the heart. When we talk about the ridges, let me just erase all this. So when we talk about the ridges themselves, remember that we talked about ridges within the atria. Those are called pectinate muscles. Ridges within the ventricles are called trabecular carne. Okay, this is right here. The chordae tendineae, the leaflets themselves, are atrioventricular valves, and those have structures attached to them, and those are the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles. Semilunar valves do not have that. All right. Also remember the layers of the heart. We have the endocardium, we have the myocardium, and we have the epicardium. Know the different names for the epicardium, which will be visceral pericardium. All right, so we talked a little bit about the right atrium, how it receives the oxygenated blood, and how it has pectinate muscles. We went through the AV valves, passively they are opening through the relaxation period, and then we're filling that right ventricle. Blood flows from the right atrium to the right ventricle. Now, between the atrium and the ventricle, we're passing our tricuspid valve. This is open when the ventricle is relaxed. We're trying to fill the ventricle. The valve closes whenever there is contraction of that right ventricle, and there is contraction when we want to now send that blood to the lungs. Ventricles have, instead of pectinate muscles, they have trabecular carne. There are multiple reasons why we believe that ventricles have trabecular carne, and that is because if the inside of the heart were to be flat, you can picture the palm of your hands when you squeeze. It will cause suction and it will cause them to stick. So they believe that this will help with some of that. The trabecular carne also has something that it has the moderator band. This moderator band is only within the right ventricle. Okay. And we have here the right chambers. We have the interatrial septum and the interventricular septum. And we have the different trabecular carne, like ridges. The conduction of the heart is very specific, and it moves, we're gonna just touch on the electrical conduction of the heart just for a minute, but it stops in the top right chamber, then it goes to the center, then to the bottom, and then to the sides. So that means that we first stimulate the atria, then we go here, and then we start stimulating the ventricles from the bottom up. Okay, but because of the position of the heart and the size of the heart, we have a ridge that comes here. It's basically a piece of trabecular carne that it has a little bit of this conduction system, and whenever we're trying to contract the heart through that electrical system, we also activate a little bit of this trabecular carne that connects to a papillary muscle, to chordae tendineae, that allows that papillary muscle to be ready by the time that we're about to contract. So it holds those leaflets together. So when you think of the right ventricle, you should think of a moderator band, which is a piece of trabecular carne, just like a little ridge of muscle that has an electrical system that receives a signal before that ventricle contracts, and that allows the papillary muscle to hold that leaflet together before contraction actually happens. Remember that the heart is contracting and relaxing in order to receive blood and pump blood. So the chambers are always undergoing a change. These changes are also happening within the valves themselves, sometimes open and sometimes closed. So let's go ahead and draw it out so you can work through the process of whether the valve is open or closed. So we have contraction and we have relaxation. And this will be in relation to either the atria or the ventricles. So let's go first one. So if we're contracting the atria, will the AV valves be open or closed? Remember that 70% of the blood that passes from the atria to the ventricles is passive. Now there is a slight contraction from the atria to push the last bit of blood to fill those ventricles. And in order to fill those ventricles, the AV valves need to be open. Now, if we were to contract the ventricles themselves, will the AV valves need to be open or closed? The AV valves will close as soon as that contraction starts to occur, the pressure builds up, it shuts the membranes, the choroid tendinae will hold the leaflets. In this case, in this picture will be, this is the right ventricle. So this will be the tricuspid valve. So during the contraction of the right ventricle, in this case, the tricuspid valve will shut off and it will shoot blood through the pulmonary trunk. So the AV valves will be closed. What about the semilunar valves? If you were to contract the atria, will the semilunar valves be open or closed? Let's remember what the semilunar valve's function is, and that is to prevent the regurgitation of blood back into the ventricle. So as our ventricles are contracting and pushing blood through these vessels, as soon as relaxation starts, the blood flow may go this way. And it is those semilunar valves located in those vessels that prevent the backflow into the ventricle itself. So let me ask you again, during contraction of the atria, will the semilunar valves be open or closed? They will be closed because we're trying to fill it with deoxygenated blood, at least for the right atrium. If we were to contract the ventricles, will the semilunar valves be open or closed? So if we're contracting those ventricles, then we're pushing blood through it, so they're going to be open. All right. Now let's go into the pulmonary circuit. The pulmonary circuit is the blood flow from the right ventricle into the exchange surfaces of the lungs. So we bring deoxygenated blood to the lungs. This is divided into the right and left arteries. So we receive blood from the right ventricle, and from the right ventricle we go into the pulmonary trunk, and as we go into the pulmonary trunk, we're going to divide into right and left arteries or veins. It will be arteries. And why is it an artery? Because there is blood away from the heart. Blood flows from the right ventricle to the pulmonary trunk primarily through which valve? It will be the pulmonary valve, and it will be a semilunar or an atrioventricular valve. It will be a semilunar valve. So when is the semilunar valve open? When the ventricle contracts, when the right ventricle contracts. When is the semilunar valve closed? When the ventricle relaxes, because we're now preventing the backflow of blood back into that ventricle. Put it here, right ventricle. This is a cross section of the heart looking at it from the top. So we have our left and we have our right. Remember that the right ventricle division between, or the connection passage between the right ventricle and the right atria will be a tricuspid valve, and the atrioventricular valve of the left side will be the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. These are the semilunar valves. The semilunar valves are different that of the ones the atrioventricular valves because they don't have any accessory attachments such as choroid tendinae, papillary muscles. The pressure that they have to endure is much lower. They're just preventing the backflow into one of those chambers. Okay, let's continue with the left atrium. So the left atrium is receiving oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. It's receiving oxygenated blood because it is coming from the pulmonary circuit, oxygenated blood. And now that left atrium is receiving blood through an artery or a vein. It's receiving blood through a vein because it is going into the heart. All right, it's not away, it's going into the heart. So the atria are receiving chambers. All right, the left atrium is receiving blood from the pulmonary circuit and it is now oxygenated, ready to be delivered to other tissues. That blood is gathered by two left and two right pulmonary veins. So we have our left atrium and we have our two right and two left pulmonary veins. This blood then flows into the left ventricle. The left ventricle fills as passively, most of it, as blood flows through the atrioventricular valve. And remember that this AV valve is the mitral valve. When will this valve be open? The valve will be open when the left ventricle is relaxing, receiving blood. If once you start contraction of the heart, you need to pressurize blood out through the aorta. This valve will shut and it will open the semilunar valve, which will be the aortic valve. The mitral valve is stronger than the tricuspid because the pressure that it has to hold against is a lot higher. If you look at the muscle mass of the right ventricle versus the left ventricle, you will see that the muscle mass of the left ventricle is a lot higher than the right ventricle. The right ventricle only has to push to the lung, so there is not that much, distance, and there is less resistance, so it doesn't have to push so hard. But the left ventricle has to pump everywhere, to your head, to your toes. So with that, the pressure that it has to stand is a lot higher, and this mitral valve is stronger than the tricuspid valve. This is another picture for that muscle mass description. Remember that we have two types of states for the heart, either be relaxing or contraction. That relaxation, we call it dilation. And you can see that there is more muscle on the left than there is on the right because we need a stronger push to go into systemic circulation than we need going into pulmonary. This is systemic. So as we saw, the heart is a muscle pump and it's pressurizing blood so we can take blood from one end to the other. Because it is a muscle, it is consuming oxygen, so we need to deliver oxygen to these muscle tissues, to these tissues, to the cardiomyocytes. The circulation of the heart is special and we call that coronary circulation. Coronary circulation has two main components, and that is arteries and it has veins. So arteries are bringing oxygenated blood to the heart, and veins are just carrying deoxygenated blood. And the same idea about arteries going into the tissue. So arteries still meets that criteria, and veins is the blood flow away from the heart, taking away from it. The arteries are, this starts from the aorta Coming off of that left ventricle, you will have that great vessel, the aorta. There will be a small portion of it that will feed coronary circulation, and the veins will return through the coronary sinus. So if you recall, we have the coronary sulcus, and the coronary sulcus is this ring around the heart. And within this ring, in the posterior section of the heart, we will have a big vessel that is called the coronary sinus. The coronary sinus ends up dumping into the right atrium. Remember, the right atrium receives blood from three main sources, and that is the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus. Cardiac veins. Let's start talking about coronary circulation with the coronary arteries. Remember that within the coronary arteries, we're bringing oxygen-rich blood to the heart itself. Okay. Now, the heart is a muscle pump, and this muscle pump has cardiomyocytes. And these cardiomyocytes are different than of skeletal, muscle. The cardiomyocyte is going to have large mitochondria that burn mostly fatty acids for fuel, and they rely mostly on aerobic respiration. And this is key because we need oxygen at all times in order for that muscle to contract and for it not to fatigue. This is different than in skeletal muscle. There will be more fatigue in skeletal muscle, or it will occur faster after, contraction. Let's go over how is it that we deliver oxygen to the heart, to that muscle pump. So we receive oxygenated blood through the aorta. So we have our 4 chambers. And from the left ventricle, we're sending now blood through systemic circulation, oxygenated blood. And from this aorta, we have 2 coronary arteries. We have a right and a left. All right. We're going to start supplying the right side of the heart with the right coronary artery. This will supply blood to the right atrium and the right ventricle. The cells of the sinoatrial node and atrioventricular node are specific cardiomyocytes that have a specific role within heart rhythm. When we talk about the contraction of cells, you will know that we have the SA node, sinoatrial node, and AV node. We're talking about specific sites of specialized cardiomyocytes that contract by themselves with automatic control. Now, just keep in mind that the blood flow to all of these areas, the atrium, the ventricle, the sinoatrial node, the AV node, is through the RCA, to the right coronary artery. As we go around the heart, the sides of the heart, now the RCA becomes a marginal artery, and is going to supply the surface of the right ventricle. All right. The posterior interventricular artery will come as we circle around the heart. Now we have the RCA, the marginal, and as when it goes posteriorly, we're going to call it posterior interventricular artery as it goes down into the posterior interventricular sulcus. Here we have the anterior representation of the coronary circulation. Remember that we're starting with coronary arteries, and the coronary arteries start at the base of the aorta. Okay, we have your aorta right here, and we have the right, we're going to say that this is the right side and this is the left side, the right coronary artery, and we have the left coronary artery. Now this right coronary artery is gonna give blood flow to the right atrium, the right ventricle, all right, as well as specific cells that provide automaticity and play a huge role within heartbeats, within that heart contraction, and that is the sinoatrial node and the AV node. All right, as it continues to progress to the side of the heart in this direction, let's go ahead and make it black. You will see that now it covers the right side of the ventricle, the surface area, and that is what we call the marginal artery. There will be a branching. Now let's take a look at the other side. This is the right side and this is the left side. So as it comes around, the marginal artery that we saw before is right here, but it continues around here. And now we have the posterior interventricular artery. So it goes through the posterior interventricular sulcus. Right, so that right coronary artery provides a lot of blood flow to the anterior portion and to the posterior portion. This is the right coronary artery, the marginal artery. Let's take a look at the left coronary artery. We have the left coronary artery providing blood flow to the left ventricle and to the left atrium. So we have our chambers. We have our aorta coming from that left ventricle. We have right, we have left ventricle, and we have our aorta, and we have our right coronary artery, and we have our left coronary artery. So the left coronary artery is going to give blood flow to the muscles within that left atrium, and then also the left ventricle. It is also going to provide blood flow to that septum right here, the interventricular septum. And as it curves around, you're going to find that it becomes the circumflex artery, and it will feed the anterior interventricular artery coming from right here. Let's take a look at the actual piece of the heart. So we have our aorta. Okay, let's put it in, let's make it black. We have our aorta right here, and we give rise to the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. As we go into the left coronary artery, right here, this piece, we divide into two sections. The anterior interventricular artery, which is located into the anterior interventricular sulcus, and we progress now into the circumflex artery. So the left coronary artery divides into two, the circumflex artery and the anterior interventricular artery. Let's take a look as we go posteriorly. Let's continue to take a look at the progression of that left coronary artery that divides into the anterior interventricular artery, or LAD, left anterior descending artery. And now we have the circumflex artery. The circumflex artery will create some blood flow to this area, and it will give you rise to a marginal artery, but this will be the left marginal artery. This is different from the right marginal artery. Marginal just means that it goes along the sides. All right. This left marginal artery confuses students because they confuse it with the posterior interventricular artery. Key differences here to remember. So this is the left and this is the right. That the posterior interventricular artery comes from the right or the left coronary artery. Correct. So the posterior interventricular artery comes from the RCA. And then the left marginal artery comes from the left coronary artery. Well, first it branches into the circumflex artery and then it comes into the marginal artery. Okay, now let's take a look at blood flow in the heart from the cardiac veins. So we have the 4 chambers, and we're going to be taking a look at this blood flow from the anterior portion of the heart. As the blood is delivered to the cardiomyocytes will consume that oxygen, and they will, the byproduct from that will be carbon dioxide. So all the blood this will be the right and this will be the left, coming in from this front portion, will come through a vessel that is called the great cardiac vein. And the great cardiac vein will drain blood from the anterior interventricular septum, all right, and as it wraps around onto something that is called the coronary sinus. All right. Now, there are anterior cardiac veins, and this is related to the right side. There are veins from this section that dump straight into the right atrium because we're bringing deoxygenated blood to the heart for oxygenation. As we move forward, there are in the posterior side of the heart, we are going to have the posterior cardiac vein, middle cardiac vein, and a small cardiac vein. So there is going to be blood wrapping around, and this small vessel that goes back from the right side into the coronary sinus is going to be called the small cardiac vein. There is going to be a middle and a posterior cardiac vein. So the middle will go right down the middle from the posterior side of the heart, and then the posterior cardiac vein will come from the side. And remember that the blood flow is in this direction. We're not supplying the cardiomyocytes, we're picking up blood flow from the cardiomyocytes. Here you can see that we have our great cardiac vein picking up blood flow for the anterior interventricular septum and all the muscles around it. And now we're going to go into the posterior side. As we go into the posterior side, you will see that there will be a posterior interventricular vein, and it will be the great sinus, the coronary sinus. And we'll take a look at when we look at the heart from the back. From the right side, we're going to have anterior cardiac veins, and these anterior cardiac veins dump straight into the right atrium. But as it continues to pick up blood from all these sides, it's now becoming the small cardiac vein. Let's take a look at the heart from the back. So this is going to be your left, this is going to be your right. Remember that we have the anterior cardiac veins that are dumping straight into the right atrium. As it picks up blood from all of this section, we have the small cardiac vein that it ends up dumping into the coronary sinus. And it's the coronary sinus that then it dumps into the right atrium. All right. We have the middle cardiac vein dumping into the coronary sinus. And this is your great cardiac vein that is now picking up from the side, also blood from the posterior cardiac vein. Key ways to remember the vessels that go along this groove. Remember that the posterior groove is called the posterior interventricular sulcus. And there are two vessels that go through that. What is the vein that runs along that groove? The middle cardiac vein. All right. Now, what is the artery that goes through that interventricular sulcus? The posterior interventricular artery. Now, this posterior interventricular artery is coming from the right coronary artery or the left coronary artery. That's correct. It comes from the right coronary artery. This plays a huge role in the location of heart attacks. Whenever patients have muscle death of a certain portion of the heart, is attributed to a lack of oxygen. That lack of oxygen is attributed to the clotting of one of these vessels. And when we occlude blood flow to a certain area, the cardiomyocytes in these sections will start to die. And this is what we call a heart attack. Massive heart attacks occur when there is clots to huge sections. All right, if we weren't able to provide oxygen to this section, all of this tissue will die.